Tonight, the Chancellor unveils the biggest tax cuts in half a century in a radical bid to kickstart growth, but the pound tumbles as a result. Not a traditional budget, and the Chancellor signalled a dramatic change in economic direction, including a penny off the basic rate of income tax and abolishing the 45% rate.
We promised a new approach for a new era. We promised to release the enormous potential of this country. Our growth plan has delivered all those promises and more.
Stamp duty thresholds will rise and the cap on bankers' bonuses is lifted. But the financial markets reacted badly. Labour condemned the plan as a dangerous risk.
The Prime Minister and Chancellor are like two desperate gamblers in a casino, chasing a losing run.
For people grappling with the soaring cost of living, what do they make of the Chancellor's announcement?
Yeah, so I'm not going to pay stamp duty. I found that out this morning. That's good.
It's a trickle-down budget. Sometime in the future, we may see a benefit if all goes well, but the poor need help right now.
As the Chancellor dismisses claims that he's gambling with the economy, we'll be looking at what the changes mean for you and at questions about how the government will pay for this. Also on the programme. In Russia, an apparent pro-Kremlin rally designed to show public support for its attempt to annex large parts of Ukrainian territory.
I'm in Italy ahead of crucial elections with victory predicted for the far right.
And the first woman to win the Booker Prize twice, the celebrated author Dame Hilary Mantel has died at the age of 70.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, going out on a high, Roger Federer teams up with old nemesis Rafa Nadal at the Laver Cup for what's set to be his final competitive match.
Good evening. The biggest tax giveaway in 50 years has been announced by the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng in a massive overhaul of the public finances. Mr Kwarteng announced two big changes to income tax in England, Wales and Northern Ireland from next April. The basic rate will be cut from 20% to 19%, and the top rate, which is currently 45% and paid on earnings over £150,000, is being abolished. In Scotland, there'll be no changes to income tax levels. Changes to stamp duty in England and Northern Ireland will come in immediately. The threshold at which you start to pay on a property is being raised to £250,000 and it'll be £425,000 for first-time buyers. In Scotland and Wales, there'll be no changes to stamp duty. A 1.25% rise in national insurance, which was introduced in April, will be reversed across the UK from the 6th of November. A planned increase of 25% in corporation tax, that's the amount that companies pay on their profits, is being scrapped. It'll remain at 19%. And the cap on bankers' bonuses, which limited them to twice the salary level, is also being axed. The plan was roundly condemned by Labour, who called the government desperate gamblers in a casino chasing a losing run. But the Chancellor said it was a new approach for a new era focused on growth, and he denied it was a gamble. The pound has fallen sharply in response to the plans. We'll have analysis and reaction, and our first report tonight is from our political editor, Chris Mason.
Shall we afford these tax cuts, Chancellor?
Technically, this wasn't even a budget. In reality, inside that blue booklet under the new Chancellor's arm, the biggest tax cuts in 50 years.
I now call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make a statement. Chancellor.
Kwasi Kwarteng told MPs it is all about firing up the economy.
Growth is not as high as it should be. This has made it harder to pay for public services, requiring taxes to rise. We need a new approach for a new era, focused on growth. Our aim over the medium term is to reach a trend rate of growth of 2.5%.
And so rises in national insurance and corporation tax are being scrapped. And then the big reveal on income tax. Those on more than £150,000 a year will pay much less.
I'm not going to cut the additional rate of tax today, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to abolish it altogether. From April the 23rd, we will have a single higher rate of income tax of 40%. This will simplify the tax system and make Britain more competitive. It will reward enterprise and work. It will incentivise growth. It will benefit the whole economy and the whole country.
And there was more, an income tax cut for everyone in England, Wales and Northern Ireland.
I can announce today that we will cut the basic rate of income tax to 19 pence in April 2023, 1 year early. That means a tax cut for over 31 million people in just a few months' time.
Also in there, an immediate cut in the property buying tax stamp duty in England and Northern Ireland. But some of the measures announced, ministers know are not popular, including removing the cap on bankers' bonuses. So why do it?
We need global banks to create jobs here, invest here, and pay taxes here in London, not in Paris, not in Frankfurt, and not in New York.
Overall, this plan involves the government borrowing a massive amount of money, a huge about-turn from recent Conservative instincts.
Rachel Reeves.
Labour pointed out the Tories have been in government since 2010.
This statement is an admission of 12 years of economic failure. And now here we are, one last throw of the dice, one last claim that these ministers will be different. For all the chopping and changing, all the chaos and confusion, there has been one person there throughout, the Prime Minister.
And other opposition parties here were some distance from impressed too.
A new era, but they've been in government for 12 years. He stretches credibility beyond breaking point, saying that tax cuts for the rich, whopping bonuses for the bankers and low corporation tax for companies will somehow refloat, magically, Britain's sinking economy.
They lift the cap on bankers' bonuses, they axe the additional rate, the top rate of income tax, which will mean that millionaires, for example, will be handed best part of £55,000 in a tax cut, which is almost double the median salary for people in Wales.
The Prime Minister and Chancellor visited a factory in Ebbsfleet in Kent this afternoon. A town that may become one of the government's new investment zones for targeted help. I asked Mr Kwarteng if he felt he was taking a big gamble.
I don't think it's a gamble at all. What was a gamble, in my view, was sticking to the course we were on. We had a tax system, taxes at a 70-year high, highest since the late 40s, and that was unsustainable. So what we had to do was have a reboot, a rethink, and what we're doing is pushing growth, incentivising investment, and actually critically helping people on lower incomes keep more of the money that they earn.
What does being fair mean to you as Chancellor?
Being fair means what we did this morning, where we reduced taxes right across the income bracket. So if you look at what we did with the basic rate, originally the basic rate was going to kick in 2024. I brought that forward to 2023. The energy intervention also has managed to help people face what was potentially a really difficult winter in terms of bills.
Do you think the economy is in recession?
Well, technically, the Bank of England said that there was a recession. I think it'll be shallow, and I hope we can rebound and grow.
So you're acknowledging there is going to be a recession?
No, I'm not acknowledging that.
You said shallow.
No, I said that there is technically a recession. We've had 2 quarters of very little negative growth, and I think these measures are going to help us drive growth. I don't think it's a bleak picture. If you look at unemployment, that's at a 50-year low, and you'd appreciate that. If you look at some of the things that we're doing in R&D and science and tech, that's also very, very positive. There are great things. That's what I said in my statement. There is a great story about the UK. I'm confident we've got the right policies to steer us through that, and I'm very confident that we can actually grow the economy in the way we all want to see.
Some financial statements from governments can feel inconsequential, easily forgotten. Today's was not one of them. This is a big change of direction from a new Chancellor and a new Prime Minister, with not long to prove that it can work. Chris Mason, BBC News.
Well, as we've been hearing, the financial markets have reacted badly to the Chancellor's announcement, with the pound falling to a fresh 37-year low against the dollar. So what impact will these measures have on the public finances? Our economics editor Faisal Islam is here. Faisal.
Thanks, Rita. It was one of the most significant sets of budgetary announcements in decades. It's designed as a jumpstart to the economy. And Kwasi Kwarteng's plan is massive tax cuts, but it's also been a brutal baptism of fire in the markets for the new Chancellor. These were the big tax changes. National insurance worth £17 billion. Corporation tax, £12 billion and rising. The income tax cut for all, £5 billion. And that scrapping of the higher rate tax worth about £2 billion. Altogether, that's about £45 billion in tax cuts in a year. And on top of that, don't forget the household energy guarantee. It's about £62 billion for a full year. And the business energy scheme, £29 billion. Well, that's only 6 months, more if it's extended. So who benefits? Well, this is a type of analysis that the government says it's not very interested in anymore. We've split the country into income groups with the richest at the bottom and the poorest at the top. And you can see the clear pattern. And the assumption from government is that giving the richest section of society most of their money back will help the economy grow for everybody all the way through. So there have been big choices, but let's give it some historical context. Let's get all the biggest tax-cutting budgets from history. And you'll note there's none here from Sunak, Osborne, Darling or Brown. They're pretty old budgets. And let's look at where today's announcement fits in. Over there, the biggest tax-cutting budget statement since 1972, which caused a boom, yes, but then a famous bust. Independent economists do see some echoes that up front this will help avoid a deep recession. But what then?
It's designed to have a boost in activity in the economy. That's the good news. The bad news is it's all about demand. It's not about supply. It's not about bringing about a long-run improvement in our prosperity. What it's doing is really bringing about an artificial boom in the economy. And the Bank of England is going to respond to that with higher interest rates.
Now, in the absence of official forecasts, the markets have had their own verdicts. We've seen some of the biggest one-day hikes in the cost of government borrowing since 1991. This is the cost of effectively a 5-year loan to government, now above 4%. And this makes it more expensive for governments to borrow all that money that they need to borrow and makes new fixed-rate mortgages and business lending pricier too. Now, sterling fell as well by over 3%, nearly 3.5% actually, to a new 37-year low against the dollar and fell against other currencies too.
I think it is very unprecedented to see this kind of market reaction with the currency falling roughly 3% against the dollar and UK borrowing costs increasing exponentially, so increasing by about 0.5 percentage point in the course of one day. That really underlines that international investors have listened to what the government have had to say and don't necessarily like what they've heard.
So the tax cuts are a down payment on a plan that the government hope will increase long-term growth. But they're not yet the whole plan. Further economic reforms and policies to address worker shortages and skills might start to help the government meet its growth target. The risk, however, is that the boost to the economy proves temporary and the high interest rates and borrowing, well, that stays high for years. Rita.
Faisal, thank you. Well, until today, the government's economic focus had been on levelling up. That is, creating more wealth and opportunity in less prosperous areas, particularly in the north of England. So what reaction has there been to today's announcements? Our correspondent Judith Moritz reports from Bolton.
Cars pasties have been baked in Bolton since the 1930s. The company's seen both good times and tough. Right now, as everywhere, its staff are grappling with the cost of living crisis. But it's not all doom and gloom.
It's a 3-bed, semi-detached. It's got a really big garden.
Upstairs in customer services, Amber's about to move house. And today's announcement has given her reason to be cheerful.
Yeah, so I'm not going to pay stamp duty. I found that out this morning. That's good.
That's a difference. You would have been paying it.
Yeah, I think it's about 1,400 that I'll be saving on, I think, roughly. So yeah, that's good, especially when I'm moving house and I need new furniture and things.
When you look at the statistics, Bolton is the kind of place you'd think needs to level up. Weekly wages are below the national average and unemployment is above it. What do those in the middle ground make of what's been announced today? In the town centre, not everyone's as positive about the new measures. Science teacher Amanda Holden will benefit from the reductions in national insurance and income tax. But she feels it's the very highest earners who'll come off best, with a bigger relative drop in taxation.
It doesn't really seem very fair that when you've got us who are hard-working, normal, middle-of-the-road people who are getting this 1%, but those who are earning a lot of money who are getting a 5% cut. Why aren't I getting a 5% cut too?
Back at the bakery, it's lunchtime and they're queuing out of the door. The Chancellor's hailed this as a new era for the UK economy, with the biggest package of tax cuts in half a century. But Peter Worthington's worked at Cars for nearly 40 of those years.
Hopefully I'm better off, but I still feel somewhere that's going to be taken away.
And he feels he's been here before.
Where are they borrowing it from? You know, they've got to pay it back. So, again, it's the taxpayer, it's the working class that end up paying for all that, really. So, you know, we're going to feel that squeeze, I think, over the long term.
They're still digesting the changes here. The government will be hoping that its overall package goes down well and that its mini-budget makes maximum impact. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Bolton.
In a series of bold announcements today, one of the most controversial is the scrapping of caps on bankers' bonuses. Kwasi Kwarteng claimed the move would reaffirm the UK as a leading financial centre and that the cap had led to higher basic salaries. But Labour said the plan simply rewards those who are already wealthy. Our business editor Simon Jack has been to the city to gauge reaction.
Attracting big money to invest in the UK was at the heart of today's package for business. Getting more companies and their workers to locate, earn, spend and pay tax here is the government's way out of this crisis. Tax cuts for workers, tax breaks for investment meant business leaders welcomed a focus on growth.
I think today was the day that the stakes just got higher. They got higher in terms of borrowing because of the energy package, and they got higher in terms of growth. Standout measures, plenty of headlines, and underlying them is a signal that says this government is going to be pro-investment, pro-growth and pro-business. That will be welcome by companies across the country.
Scrapping an EU-wide cap on bankers' bonuses is controversial and perhaps not top of many people's list of Brexit benefits, but it's an industry that pays over 10% of all taxes in the UK.
Like it or not, the financial services industry is a huge part of the UK economy. The global financial services industry is dominated by New York, and New York has been exerting a stronger and stronger grip on the industry over the past few years. Anything that the city can do, that the government can do to help the city regain some of that market share is going to benefit, in the end, the whole economy.
The pitch to business is big and pretty simple. If you invest here, whether you're domestic or an international business, you will pay less tax. You will take home more pay and you will face lighter regulation. The question is that a sufficiently attractive package to butt a decade of low business investment?
What do we want? 10%!
The government wants a swifter resolution to disruptive pay disputes and said it will require unions to put pay offers to a member vote to ensure strikes can only be called once negotiations have broken down. Union leaders said today that tax cuts and pay rises for high earners will do little to ease industrial tensions.
On what planet did the Prime Minister and Chancellor think it's OK to lift the cap on bankers' bonuses and to cut the real pay of nurses? This is a budget that's a reverse Robin Hood. It's about redistribution for sure, but it's about redistributing from everybody else to the rich and to wealthy corporations.
In all, this was a major departure from previous government policy, and it will need businesses to take heart, not fright, if it is to succeed. Simon Jack, BBC News.
Among the government's plans is the setting up of investment zones in 38 areas in England to boost local economies. Planning rules will be relaxed in these areas and taxes will be cut for businesses, including no business rates on new and expanded sites and no stamp duty on land developed for commercial or residential use. Businesses will also be exempt from paying national insurance contributions for new employees up to a certain threshold. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth is in Wolverhampton, which could be in line to become one of these investment zones.
It's been hammered home pretty clearly. The government wants to get the economy going. Businesses like this building suppliers will be key. So in certain places, like here in Wolverhampton, they could face far fewer planning rules and be offered tax breaks to encourage investment.
Tees Valley, the West Midlands, Norfolk and the west of England to establish investment zones.
Ideas welcomed by the boss, but while he has supported the Tories in the past, he has some reservations.
Having businesses with lower taxes will always encourage them to invest more, but if those lower taxes means that we have to borrow huge amounts extra, I have a concern on that. But yes, is it positive for business? The answer's very much yes.
This is another attempt to reboot places that have faced decline. And it's not just commercial development that could be sped up, but residential too. But in Wolverhampton city centre, this family-run cafe questions what was on offer for struggling small businesses like theirs.
They can do things like pedestrianisation and make everything lovely flats for people to move into, but it's not going to happen overnight. And how long can we hang on for before it's too late and we're not here anymore?
In my opinion, they're like, oh yeah, we'll give lots of things to bigger corporated businesses, but what about, like my mum said, the little guys? So if they lose our type of businesses, then it's alienating quite a lot of people. And I think everyone just needs to kind of make a stand for not just the big guys.
Wolverhampton Science Park is home to start-ups and established firms, such as these, working in water safety, computing support and offering non-profit loans. All broadly support today's measures, but with questions about how local incentives will work.
How do we get the talent to not only work here, but live here as well? So the key for me will be what's spent on infrastructure and all the bits that go around it, like your roads. And
is it something that's going to help new startup businesses? Is it something that's going to help smaller businesses? Or is there help there for existing businesses such as us, which have been around for 22 years, helping the local economy?
I think they've taken the measures that they needed to do, and it's just a matter of time now to see whether their strategy works.
And with so much at stake, many are waiting to see the consequences of the government's chosen direction. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Wolverhampton.
So with £45 billion of tax cuts announced today, the biggest slash since the 1970s, what does it mean for those earning below the national living wage and struggling to get by? Our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan reports now from Leeds.
Shortly after the Chancellor's statement, by a church in Leeds, a crowd gathered to collect free food.
That one? Okay.
If to govern is to choose, there was a palpable sense here that ministers had chosen not to help these families.
The folks who make the big announcements and laws that affect millions of people's lives have no idea what all of these dear families, our neighbours, are living through on a daily basis. It feels like inequality is actually getting worse and not better.
Parts of Leeds have some of the highest levels of poverty in England. Old, poorly insulated back-to-back homes add to energy costs.
We're all struggling and it's not fair. Why should the rich get richer and the poor get poorer?
Chrissy Thornton runs a small charity, Disability Families of Middleton.
We went round the whole estate to deliver Christmas presents to the children.
She has custody of her two grandchildren. 11-year-old Dominic has several disabilities. They struggle to get by on benefits, and Chrissy says the Chancellor didn't make life any easier today.
I'm having to do my washing once a week because I can't afford the gas and electric. Bills are going up sky high, food's going up sky high, you go shopping, you can't find what you want, and when you do find what you want, it's gone up every tripping week.
For many low-income families, the £2,500 energy price cap still does not make bills affordable. At this food pantry, they now regularly have to waive the £3.50 fee as people can't afford it.
I'm down to my last £5 in my bank account, and I don't get paid again now till the 1st.
65-year-old Diane McHale-Fannin has received food from the pantry. She's currently looking for a job, so doesn't think today's changes will make a difference.
Well, they weren't much help to somebody who's not working.
And despite your best efforts, you're not working?
Well, despite my best efforts of applying for jobs, I'm not getting them.
In some areas, washing lines are making a comeback as tumble dryers are switched off to save money. cafe manager Pauline Barrow has made that switch. We asked her to check if the Chancellor had made her richer.
So this looks like I'm going to be about £100 a year better off. But my mortgage has already gone up before yesterday, £100 a month. So, and it's going to go up again, so I'm not going to be any better off.
Have a look through if there's anything you don't want.
The government believe today's changes will eventually benefit the entire country. Few anti-poverty campaigners share that optimism. Michael Buchanan, BBC News, Leeds.
Let's speak now to our political editor, Chris Mason, who's in Westminster for us. And Chris, give us your assessment as to how much of a gamble this economic plan is.
I think this is a big gamble, Rita, because it is a massive leap in a new direction, a wholesale shredding of the economic strategy of the Conservative government of the last 12 years, and indeed the Labour government that came before it. The prize is economic growth, but will it deliver, and will the tools that they are choosing to deliver it be sufficiently popular? But those in government argue it's still a calculated gamble. They even avoid using that word gamble at all. Why? Because they think it'd be an even bigger gamble to do nothing at all. They look at the economy, they see it's been sluggish for years and years and years, and it is teetering on, if not already in, recession, as acknowledged by the Bank of England and the Chancellor to me today. So they feel like they have no option but to act, but this is an all or nothing strategy, and they will own the consequences of it, good or bad. They're not going to be able to blame it on anyone else. So for that reason, it seems to me like quite a gamble.
As you say, Chris, it is a big departure from previous Conservative economic strategy. How is it going down within the party?
There are certainly some jitters, there's no doubt about that, and some of them are broken out publicly already. So some fear that it simply looks unfair, that the very richest are getting whopping tax cuts. Others worry that it's a sugar rush to the economy right now, and the danger of that, they fear, is that you could have even higher rates of inflation. But there are others, though, within the party who will say, look, 3 cheers. Thankfully, there is finally a truly Conservative budget, as they would see it, after the compromise of the coalition years, and then we had Brexit, and then we have COVID. They finally think they have a properly Conservative Prime Minister and Chancellor, which brings us to the broader political argument. This is all about giving the economy extra oomph. What it definitely does is give politics extra oomph, because the gap between the Conservatives and the opposition parties is stark and wide.
Chris, thank you. Our political editor, Chris Mason there. And there are more updates, news and analysis on BBC News Online. That's bbc.co.uk/news, and also by using the BBC News app. In other news now, and voting has begun in 4 regions of Ukraine that have been seized and occupied by Russian forces in so-called independence referendums. People in Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson have been told to vote on proposals for their regions to leave Ukraine and become part of Russia. Ukraine and its allies, including the UK, have denounced the ballots as a sham to justify the annexation of Ukrainian territory. In Moscow, there have been rallies in favour of the referendums, but there's also growing unease over President Putin's plans to call up more men to fight in Ukraine, as our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg reports.
It was the moment the Kremlin tried to show the people still back their president and what he's doing in Ukraine. Within days, Vladimir Putin is expected to annex a huge swathe of Ukrainian territory. There's international condemnation, but at home, the official picture is they trust Putin. Many of the people here, though, didn't trust us. When we asked the simple question, why have you come to this rally? There was a certain reluctance to answer. But they had something to say on the subject of mobilization. The call-up is worrying everyone with relatives of fighting age, Natalia says. Not Viera. I'd be much happier if my son got wounded fighting in Ukraine than die of alcoholism here, she says. Fighting is a proper man's job.
This is not a spontaneous display of love.
for Vladimir Putin and his policies. It is a highly choreographed affair, designed to give the impression that the whole country is behind the president. A lot of the people we've spoken to here today have been brought in specially from schools, from factories and other state organisations. In Ukraine today, in those areas occupied by Russian troops, self-styled referendums began on joining Russia. The West has denounced the votes as a sham, a smokescreen for annexation by Moscow. Back in Russia, more goodbyes, more men called up to fight in Ukraine. There's growing concern here that the scale of mobilization is far greater than the Kremlin had let on. Emotions are running high. Why have you taken our sons? A mother is heard asking this officer. When he tells the audience that his own son isn't eligible for the call-up, listen to the reaction. For the president, this could become a problem. Vladimir Putin once promised Russians stability. Now he's sending them to the front line. Persuading Russians to keep faith in him won't be easy. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
After a week of unrest on the streets of Iran, its army leaders have called protesters enemies conspiring against the Islamic Republic. At least 30 people are thought to have been killed in the protests after the death of a woman in police custody. Mahsa Amini had been detained for breaking the country's strict dress code for women. The government says her death is being investigated and that rioting won't be tolerated. Syrian authorities say that more than 70 people died when a migrant boat sank in the Mediterranean yesterday. About 20 survivors are being treated in hospital. It's believed the boat left 2 days ago from northern Lebanon with more than 100 people on board. The area is increasingly being used by migrants wanting to travel to Europe. Political leaders in Italy are holding closing rallies this evening ahead of a general election on Sunday. Giorgia Meloni is widely expected to become Italy's first female prime minister. International allies are concerned by the far-right politics and neo-fascist origins of her Brothers of Italy party. Our Europe editor Katya Adler is in Rome for us tonight. Katya.
Well, Rita, there is so much at stake here. You know, like in the UK, Italians are suffocating under a cost of living crisis at home, while abroad there's Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Italy is a key NATO ally. So who becomes prime minister here really matters. Now, polls, which are seen as reliable in Italy, predict it will be Giorgia Meloni, and she's a very controversial figure.
Italy's political earthquake travels in style these days. Are you the best person to govern Italy, Giorgia? I had to ask. Giorgia Meloni, self-appointed defender of the Italian people, poised to become Italy's next premier, comes from the neo-fascist hard right, though her tone is now consciously more mainstream.
Italy is changing, says Giorgia Meloni. While her critics worry about her roots in the far right, she's carefully concentrating on economics. This crowd is worried about the cost of bread and the price of gas. They really want to give her a go.
We need to change the future of our country, for our children. We believe in Giorgia Meloni.
Political rivals are sounding the alarm about far-right government, but many here think they're exaggerating.
Right is trying to scare us and to design enemies for us. And instead of that, left is building and trying to build rights for people. They are talking about the past, and we want to go to the future.
Giorgia Meloni insists there are no nostalgic fascists in her party. But what about this? It looks like a fascist salute. Just surfaced on social media, we see a city councillor from Meloni's party making the gesture with others at a family funeral. Prosecutors are investigating. Then there are Meloni's chosen coalition partners, both traditionally close to Vladimir Putin. Silvio Berlusconi, remember him, and far-right Matteo Salvini.
But that's the right way to do it.
Italy's allies in the EU and NATO worry about a Meloni government. Should they?
Let's judge the government, the future government, by facts. She voted in favor of the sanctions. There is no reason that she would do different things in government than she's done in the opposition.
Most Italians just want some stability. These ceramic workers' jobs are at risk because of spiralling energy costs.
We start work before dawn now, because energy prices are cheaper then. Our bills have gone up 1,000%. I just hope that the next government has a stable majority so they can do something fast to help us and other struggling workers.
Whichever political bandwagon voters jump on this Sunday, Italy's next government will have their hands full, but their policy choices limited by EU law and the Italian constitution. Cold comfort, perhaps, for those fearing the far right. Katja Adler, BBC News, Rome.
Let's take a look now at some other stories making the news today. Buckingham Palace has released an image of King Charles carrying out official government duties from the King's Red Box for the first time. The image shows a photo of his late parents, Queen Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh, behind him. And tennis legend Roger Federer is on court right now in the final professional match of his career. He's playing doubles with his longtime rival Rafael Nadal, with both representing Team Europe in the Laver Cup being played at the O2 Arena in London. The celebrated author Hilary Mantel, widely regarded as one of the greatest British novelists of the century, has died at the age of 70. She was best known for her trilogy of historical novels about the rise and fall of Thomas Cromwell in Tudor England, which began with Wolf Hall. Her publisher HarperCollins said she died suddenly yet peacefully, surrounded by close family and friends. Our culture editor Katie Razzle looks back at her life.
Thomas Cromwell is now 50 years old. The same small, quick eyes, the same thick-set, imperturbable body.
Cromwell, why are you such a person?
Thomas Cromwell and Hilary Mantel will be forever entwined. Her trilogy about the life of Henry VIII's fixer became a BAFTA-winning TV series. Her vivid novels conjured a Tudor world of intrigue and violence that readers could feel and taste. She won the Booker Prize twice for Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies, the first woman to do so. Mantel had been writing historical and contemporary fiction for years before she found popular acclaim.
I hesitated for such a long time before beginning to write this book. Actually, for about 20 years.
The young Hilary Mantel had wanted to be a barrister, but her lack of connections and the endometriosis she struggled with all her life saw her turn to writing instead. The law's loss was humanity's gain.
Anywhere she chose to write about, at any time, any character, was the best that anybody could have done. She's a classic writer in the footsteps of Dickens and Mrs. Gaskell and George Eliot, but she was writing in our time. She really is that important.
Get everything settled before Europe wakes up to what's happening.
Others have also been paying tribute. The Royal Shakespeare Company's adaptations of Mantel's novels saw Ben Miles as Cromwell. He said today she was extraordinary, one of the greatest writers of our time. Recognition of her searing talents brought Mantel a damehood for services to literature, and she talked in recent years of her hopes for the future.
There's so much I want to do, and it's just a question of, how much stamina have I got? What time have I got left?
Dame Hilary Mantel died from a stroke in a hospital in Exeter with her family beside her.
The author Dame Hilary Mantel, who's died at the age of 70. Time now for a look at the weather. Here's Thomas Schaffenacker and some autumnal weather en route.
Yeah, that's right, but not until next week. I think this weekend actually isn't looking too bad at all for most of us. The skies are pretty clear out there right now, and that spells fine weather for most of us tomorrow and indeed through the bulk of the weekend. Sunshine, yes, there'll be a few showers around, but I think they will be well scattered. So this is what it looks like early on Saturday morning. A few showers scattered here and there. Pretty nippy in the glens of Scotland, maybe close to freezing, but for most of us it'll be between around, say, 5 and 10 degrees. So Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon see these showers developing across parts of England and Wales, but in Northern Ireland and Scotland the weather should be predominantly dry, and our temperatures tomorrow 12 degrees for our friends in Lerwick, 14 in Stornoway, Belfast will be 15, and in London around 18. That was Saturday. This is Sunday's weather. Again, most of us a fine day here, but this cold front approaching and that heralds a change. Next week we're expecting colder air to sweep in from the northern climes, and the winds will be brisk as well. In fact, across some northern parts of the UK, temperatures may struggle to reach 10 degrees. And you can see where the air's coming from. Here's Iceland, Greenland, Iceland, these blue colours filtering in across the UK. That's really chilly autumnal air. And if you look at the outlook, look at Aberdeen, 9 degrees on Monday, outbreaks of rain, some brisk winds. And in London, I think the feel will be in the teens as well. So a taste of something colder on the way, but it won't last for too long. Temperatures should recover. Before I go away, I want to update you on Hurricane Fiona, powerful storm out in the Atlantic, currently headed for Nova Scotia and also Newfoundland. It will be a very powerful storm, bringing hurricane force winds. And the forecast is that waves around some coastal areas could even approach 10 or 12 metres, so likely to be some big impacts from this storm system, and we will keep you posted.
Thomas, thank you. And that is the BBC News at 10, as now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. But from the 10 o'clock team, it's good night.